If I'd refused that transfer, I would have kept my job title and my sleep. 6 nights later, a shotgun blast on a hillside would prove the dog outside my window had a human name, and the village had been living under it for years. They called from supervision on a Friday afternoon. The kind of call that arrives already decided. The woman on the line spoke with careful softness. "Professor Mateo Cruz," she said, "your school has no hours for you next week. Groups are closing." I gripped the edge of my counter until my thumb hurt. "There is a vacancy," she continued, "in a rural community near the edge of the municipality. If you want to keep working, you need to accept the reassignment." I asked for details and got only what would move me: the name, a code, and an order to report Monday. San Isidro de la Loma. I repeated it, trying to make it sound ordinary. All weekend I packed fast: clothes, notebooks, 2 books from normal school. I added a small flashlight, because darkness never asks permission. Before sunrise Monday, I took a bus to the municipal seat, then squeezed into an old pickup that carried people and feed sacks to the outlying communities. The paved road ended. Dust pushed through every crack. Dry hills rose on both sides, and scattered houses stood alone like unfinished sentences. When the driver shouted the village name, I climbed down with my suitcase and backpack, and the truck rolled away without waiting. The silence it left behind felt intentional. San Isidro de la Loma was small, unpainted blockhouses, a few adobe walls, metal roofs, flashing in the morning glare. Streets were wheel ruts. Dogs moved like shadows. A radio played somewhere, then cut out so abruptly it sounded like a hand had covered the speaker. The school sat behind chain link, 2 long concrete classrooms, and a tiny office shack. Inside, Director Zamora read my transfer order quickly, wrote my name in a control notebook, and slid a ring of keys across the desk. "Third group," he said. "House is 2 streets down, the one with the tree in back." I thanked him, trying to be upbeat. He hesitated, then looked up as if spending a small piece of honesty. "Teachers don't last long here," he said. "Because it's isolated?" I offered, eager for a sensible reason. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. The house was unfinished block with a crooked door and a metal roof. Inside, a narrow bedroom with a single bed, a small table by a tiny kitchen, a bathroom in back. Beyond it, a dirt patio held 1 tree, and a fence of wire and weathered boards. I unpacked and placed my flashlight on the bedside stand like a charm. That afternoon, my students filed in with dust on their shoes and a carefulness that didn't belong to kids. I wrote my name on the board, had them introduce themselves, and noticed several of them keep glancing toward the window that faced the hill behind the village, as if something up there demanded a portion of their attention. Parents lingered near the fence, watching from a distance. No one stepped forward to greet me or ask about homework. Their faces weren't unfriendly, just guarded, like they'd learned not to get attached. Only one person approached. An older woman with silver hair pulled tight and a dark rebozo over her shoulders took my hand briefly. "Dua Elvira," she said, and pressed a folded napkin into my palm. Inside were tortillas and beans, "for your supper." I thanked her, surprised by the kindness. Before she turned away, her eyes sharpened. "When it gets dark, you lock everything," she said. "Doors, windows, no gaps here. Nobody walks outside at night." "Because of thieves?" I asked, already building a logical explanation. Dua Elvira shook her head once small, final, and walked away. That evening, I ate alone. The village sounds faded as the sky drained. Distant voices, 1 dog barking, a radio murmuring and then clicking off. The metal roof ticked as it cooled. The air smelled of dust and dry leaves. I washed my plate and checked the locks twice. I told myself this was just a place without streetlights, a place where people stayed in because the dark was deep. The mind makes monsters when it doesn't know the map. Crickets sang, somewhere far away. A dog barked once. Then, the village quieted so completely that I could hear my own breath. Footsteps came on the dirt road, heavy, slow, deliberate. They stopped in front of my house. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. A violent crash sounded behind the house. Wire rattling, boards shuddering, dirt scraping. Something had come into my patio. I sat up, shoes on, flashlight in my hand. At the bedroom window, the thin curtain showed a shape beside the tree, too large to be a person and too steady to be wind. I lifted the curtain a finger width and clicked the light on. The beam struck the broad back of a black animal. The moment the light touched it, it turned with unnatural precision, and 2 red eyes fixed on mine through the glass steady points of heat in the dark. It stepped closer. Claws rasped the wall like a knife on concrete. Its head was canine, but the size was wrong, and the mouth, when it opened, showed long pale teeth. For a heartbeat, it rose onto two legs, bracing itself against the wall until its shoulders reached the height of my window frame. I shut the light off and pressed myself to the wall, realizing too late that whatever I'd seen was not a stray, and it had come here as if it knew exactly who I was. Morning arrived, thin and pale, and I walked to the school with sand in my eyes from not sleeping. The yard looked harmless in daylight, the tires half buried, the flagpole, the chain link catching sunlight. My body didn't believe it. The moment I stepped into the classroom, several students stared at me with a steady focus that made my skin tighten. Julien, a tall boy who sat in the back, didn't wait for greetings. "You heard the hill dog last night, right?" he asked, as if he were asking whether it rained. I hesitated too long. That was answer enough. They knew. They had always known. What had felt like a private nightmare was part of the village weather, predictable as heat. That night I locked everything again. I shoved a chair under the back doorknob. I checked the window latches with my fingers until the metal bit my nails. I set the flashlight on the bed and told myself that whatever it was, it could not be as intelligent as it had felt. Fear makes patterns. Fear makes meaning. The village went quiet with the same unnatural discipline. Then the footsteps returned heavy and measured on the dirt road. They stopped at my door, and the crash came in the patio, wire snapping back, boards rattling, dirt scuffed. A wet snort pressed against the back door, close enough that the sound seemed to pass through the wood. I did not turn on the flashlight. I sat rigid on the bed and listened as claws scraped the wall slow. Patient strokes, as if something were sharpening itself. The growl that followed was low and private, less a threat than a reminder. I am here. I can come back. When it left the way it had arrived, without hurry. I stayed sitting until dawn again, my mouth dry, my thoughts circling like flies. The next days, the pattern solidified. Daylight belonged to lessons and chalk and the squeak of chairs. Night belonged to footsteps and the fence and breathing that did not belong to any man. The repetition did something worse than frighten me. It trained me. I began to anticipate each sound, and that anticipation gnawed at me all day. I started writing it down, because writing makes a thing real in a way your mind can't argue with. In a small notebook, I recorded times and details. The village quiets, footsteps on dirt, stop at the door, impact in the patio, scrape at the wall, snort, leave. On the fourth morning, after the animal finally stayed away long enough for sunlight to seep through cracks, I went into the patio with the notebook still open in my hand. The dirt near the tree was churned. The fence had fresh vibration marks where wire had been pushed and snapped back. I crouched and stared until my eyes adjusted to shapes in the soil. There were paw prints, huge, with deep claw marks, but between them were other impressions longer, oval, with toes and a heel, human feet. In some places, the two overlapped, as if one had stepped directly into the other. A dog's paw inside a human footprint under a dog's claw. The dirt held them together like a secret it didn't want to keep. A word I hadn't taken seriously since childhood began to circle in my head. Nahual. Not as a story to scare kids into behaving, as an explanation that sat too neatly on the evidence in front of me. That afternoon I went to find Duaya Elvira. Her house was near the edge of the village, a low structure with a shaded porch and wooden chairs worn smooth by years. She watched me approach, as if she had been listening for my steps. I didn't waste time with politeness. I told her about the footsteps, the red eyes, the way the animal had braced itself against my wall like a man. I told her about the mixed tracks. The moment I said, human footprints, her face tightened and she lowered her voice. "They say it comes when a new teacher arrives," she said. "Always the same." "Who says?" I asked. She looked past me toward the hill. "Everyone. And no one. Because saying it out loud is like inviting it closer." I asked her what it was. She didn't dramatize it. She spoke like someone discussing an illness that runs through families. "A Nahual isn't a ghost," she said. "It's flesh, a person who learned a way of wearing another skin." I tried to laugh, tried to make it small. "So a man puts on a costume and scares teachers?" Dua Elvira's eyes held mine, unblinking. "If it were only a costume, your dirt wouldn't hold two kinds of footprints." She told me about other teachers. One lasted 2 weeks, shaking so badly he couldn't write on the board. Another fell sick, stomach knotted, eyes wide as if he'd swallowed the night. They all asked for transfers. The school became a station where teachers arrived and fled, and the village learned to stop treating them like they mattered. "Why would someone do that?" I asked. Her answer came slowly, as if each word cost her. "Because there are men here who don't want children learning beyond what they can control. A boy who reads can leave. A girl who learns numbers can question pay. Education is a door, and some men live by keeping doors shut. She didn't need to name him. Even before she did, I felt the outline of the person she meant, someone heavy in the village, someone people avoided without saying why. Don Rogelio Barrera, she said finally. He has land, cattle. He's the head of the parents' committee. People respect him the way you respect a storm. I had seen him once, near the store by the main ruts, speaking with two men who nodded too quickly. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a clean shirt, sleeves rolled as if to show he worked, though his hands were too smooth for constant labor. When he looked at you, he didn't smile. He measured. How do they know it's him? I asked. Dewey Elvira's mouth tightened. They don't know. They survive. There's a difference. That night the footsteps returned, and the knowledge changed the fear. Before, I'd been terrified of a creature. Now, I was terrified of a person who had decided my presence threatened his order. I lay rigid in the dark and listened as it circled the patio. I imagined Don Rogelio's face behind those red eyes. The thought made my stomach turn, not from superstition, but from the uglier truth. People do monstrous things when they believe they're protecting what belongs to them. When the animal finally left, I didn't feel relief. I felt a decision forming, hard and bright. If I stayed in the house every night, I would keep being prey. If I asked for a transfer, I would give the village to him exactly as he wanted it. Silent, obedient, uneducated. So the next afternoon I asked a father to lend me a machete, pretending I wanted to check the schoolyard at night, in case someone was breaking in. He handed it over without questions, eyes sliding away, as if he didn't want to be responsible for what I might see. Before dusk I locked my house as usual, arranged the chair under the back doorknob, set my shoes by the bed, left the flashlight where it always sat, everything to suggest I would be inside. Then I walked back to the school and shut myself into my classroom, where the window faced the dirt path that led toward the hill and a cluster of rocks and brush. I turned off the lights and waited, machete leaned against the wall, flashlight cold in my hand. As the village fell into its disciplined silence, a shape moved along the path, one human figure, walking without a lamp, toward the rocks as if the dark belonged to him. From the classroom window, the night looked flatter than it should have, like darkness pressed into a sheet. The figure on the path moved with a confidence that made my throat tighten. He didn't stumble. He didn't pause to listen. He walked as if every stone had his name on it. He reached the area of boulders and scrub and stopped where the shadows gathered thickest. For a moment he stood still, and the silence around him felt arranged, like an audience holding its breath. Then he crouched. Even from that distance, I could make out the motions, the pull of a shirt over his head, the bend to step out of pants, the careful placing of fabric on the ground. The act was deliberate, ritualized. He wasn't undressing the way a man undresses to wash or sleep. He was preparing. He reached into the brush and dragged out something dark and heavy. At first I thought it was a blanket. Then it unfurled in his hands with a stiffness that did not belong to cloth. It shone dully when it caught the faintest light like hide. He lifted it and laid it over his shoulders. My grip on the flashlight tightened until the knuckles ached. The machete felt like a joke, a straight piece of metal against whatever I was watching. He pulled the dark skin down over his back, adjusted it as if fitting a jacket, then lowered himself to the ground on hands and feet. In the next breaths, the outline of his body changed. Not like in stories, not with smoke or sudden magic. It was uglier, more physical. Like the body was being forced into a shape it barely remembered. His shoulders widened, his spine arched. The length of his torso seemed to stretch and sink. He moved in small, testing motions, weight shifting, joints settling until the figure in the dirt was no longer shaped like a man. A large black dog stood where he had been. It shook itself once, as if sealing the transformation into place, and I saw a brief flash of red, where its eyes turned toward the village. Then it ran fast, direct, certain down the path toward San Isidro de la Loma, toward my house. Every instinct told me to run after it, to chase the impossible, and keep it in sight. But another instinct, colder, sharper, told me that following it would put me alone behind it in the dark, exactly where it wanted me. So I moved the other way. I slipped out of the classroom, shut the door without letting it click, and walked through the village with my flashlight off. The machete's weight steadied my hand, but it did not steady my heart. In the dark, the houses looked like crouched animals. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the dogs held their tongues. As I reached the corner that gave a partial view of my patio, the sounds arrived before the sight. The fence rattling, a low growl, claws scraping concrete in slow strokes. It was there, doing what it had done every night, as if the ritual required it. I stepped into the open and snapped my flashlight to full. The beam cut across the yard and struck the creature as it braced itself against my wall on two legs. 4 claws splayed like hands. The red eyes turned to me with a calm that felt almost human. For a second, fear tried to fold my voice shut. I forced it open. "Come out," I shouted into the village. "Come out and look. It's in the teacher's house. You hear it every night, now see it." My words scraped the silence. And at first, nothing happened. Then, a door opened. Then, another. Light bloomed in narrow cones as men stepped into the ruts with flashlights, sticks, and one old hunting shotgun cradled like a grudge. The creature dropped to all fours. It sprang toward the fence, muscles coiling, and for a heartbeat it looked like it would clear it easily, vanish into the hill the way it always did. The shotgun cracked. The sound slammed into my chest. The animal yelped high and furious, and one of its back legs buckled, as if the bone had been knocked aside. It hit the dirt hard, rolled, then surged up again, limping, leaving a dark smear where its blood met the dust. It ran for the hill, dragging the wounded leg, and the red eyes flashed once more before the brush swallowed it. No one said, "Let it go." Men moved as a single rough unit, following the drops of blood that marked the path, like a cruel breadcrumb trail. I went with them, because if I turned back alone, I knew I would feel the creature's eyes on me from somewhere I couldn't see. The trail led toward the same rocks I had watched from the school. The farther we walked from the houses, the more the night pressed in. The air smelled of dust and iron now, the metallic bite of fresh blood. The flashlight beam shook with each step, turning stones into sudden faces and shadows into traps. At the boulders, the blood pattern changed. It pooled, smeared, then stopped. The animal was gone. In its place, on the ground between rocks, lay a man on his back, breathing in short, angry pulls. His right leg was soaked, the wound in the exact place the shot had struck the creature. His hat lay nearby, and beside it were his clothes and the dark skin, crumpled like something that had been peeled off in a hurry. Even in that weak light, there was no mistaking the face. Don Rogelio Barrera. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they were surprised, because saying it aloud would turn a long-held fear into a fact. One man stepped forward and spat into the dirt. "How many teachers?" he said, voice trembling with rage. "How many did you chase off?" Another man lifted his flashlight, letting it fall on Don Rogelio's smooth hands, on the clean shirt folded in the dirt. "You wanted our kids in your fields," he said. "You wanted them tired and quiet. You wanted them to believe the hill owned them." Don Rogelio tried to speak, but his words came out strangled, half pain and half fury. His eyes were bright with something worse than fear entitlement. He looked at the men around him as if they were still supposed to bow. Nobody bowed. A third man pulled out a phone, hands shaking, and called the municipal seat. He spoke fast, giving directions like someone afraid he might lose courage if he paused. When the patrol finally arrived, its headlights cut the darkness into harsh strips. The officers approached with weapons half raised, taking in the blood, the skin, the wound, the ring of men. Their faces told me they'd heard rumors before. They'd just never been invited into the proof. They cuffed Don Rogelio while he cursed through clenched teeth. As they lifted him, he turned his head and his gaze landed on me with a heat that made my stomach tighten. Not the gaze of a man caught. The gaze of a man who believed I had stolen something from him. On impulse, I said the first true sentence that came to me, loud enough for the men and the officers to hear. "A school is not your pasture," I said. "You don't get to decide who stays ignorant." Don Rogelio's mouth twisted, and for an instant, I thought he might laugh. Instead, he whispered something I couldn't fully hear, a string of syllables, like a prayer said backward. The officers shoved him into the truck, and the engine started. As the patrol pulled away, the headlights slid across the crumpled dark skin on the ground. In that brief sweep of light, it looked less like an object and more like a thing waiting. Men began to drift back toward the village, talking in low bursts, angry and relieved. I stayed by the rocks a moment longer, listening to the sudden return of insects, the first timid sounds of nightlife creeping back now that the threat had a name. I told myself it was over. Flesh and blood had been exposed. The monster had been reduced to a man bleeding in the dirt. The logic was clear. Then, behind me, in the brush where the flashlight beams didn't reach, a single heavy footstep pressed into the earth, slow, deliberate, as if something else had been watching, learning the sound of my breathing. I turned so fast the beam swung wild, and the rocks and scrub snapped into empty shapes. Nothing stood there, only the smell of iron, the cooling air, and the silence returning with its mouth half open. After that night, the village changed the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window. The dark still came, but it arrived without footsteps on the road, without wires snapping in my patio, without the scrape of claws on concrete. quiet returned to being just quiet. Don Rogelio did not come back to San Isidro de la Loma. People argued about where the patrol took him, about whether he'd buy his way free. I stopped listening. Chasing rumors felt like looking for a second monster after the first one had already shown its face. I finished the school year. Parents began lingering closer to the classroom door. Someone left a box of chalk on my desk without a word. A broken hinge on the fence got repaired. The students watched the hill less, and watched each other more, as if they were learning what to do with the space fear had occupied. Julian stayed after class one day, shuffling his feet. He didn't apologize, not directly, but his voice came out small. "We grew up with it," he said. "We thought that's just how nights are." I answered with the only truth that mattered. "A place that teaches you to be afraid is not a home," I said. "It's a cage." Even with the nights quiet, my body didn't trust them. I woke sometimes with my heart already racing, certain I'd heard breathing near the wall. It would be wind worrying the boards, or the roof ticking as it cooled. Fear, once trained, is reluctant to retire. On the day I packed to leave, I went to Dua Sierra's porch to thank her. She sat in the shade, hands folded, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "You stayed," she said, and it sounded like astonishment more than approval. "I didn't want him to win," I replied. Dua Elvira's gaze slid toward the hill. "People think they caught the thing," she said, "but they only caught the man who used it." "What do you mean?" I asked. "A Nahual doesn't die like an animal," she said, "and it doesn't live like a story. It lives in habits, in hunger, in pride that doesn't know shame." I remembered the single heavy step behind me at the rocks, the way the brush had held empty shapes. Dua Elvira leaned forward, fingers closing around my wrist, cold, firm. "If one night," she whispered, "not here, somewhere else, you hear footsteps too heavy for a man and too measured for a beast, don't look out the window. Don't answer. Don't give it your name." I left her porch under a sun that felt suddenly far away. That last night, in the empty house, I lay fully dressed, listening to the metal roof tick as it cooled, telling myself the rules had changed. Then, faintly from the patio, came a slow rasping sound, one stroke, then another like a claw being tested against wood. I sat up, breath caught, flashlight already in my hand, and I kept my eyes on the dark wall, because her warning returned like a command. "Don't look out the window." So I didn't. I listened until the sound stopped, and understood the cruelest truth of that year. Even when the monster is unmasked, fear can keep wearing its skin. By the time the rains threatened the hills again, another family enrolled their daughter. Director Zamora told me, almost reluctantly, that next cycle they might open a second group. He said it like a man testing whether hope was safe to touch. On my last morning, I stood in the schoolyard and listened to children arguing over a ball made of tape. The sound should have felt simple. Instead, it felt earned. In that village, laughter wasn't the absence of danger, it was a decision made in spite of it.